Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
The Art of Physics. In The Art of Physics, Zahaan Bharmal explains 8 ideas from physics that has transformed his view of everyday life and may do the same for you, proving that somewhere in the universe a supreme being has a great sense of humour. They decided to give it to the presenter who got an E in his physics O-level, but I'm delighted to say that Zahaan is about to put me right as he joins me live on the line. Zahaan, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Well, I'm very good. Now, let's just start with some basics here. Physics for me is a different language, okay? Any of the sciences have me scratching my head, and suddenly I'm transported back to the early 80s where I am spectacularly flunking all my sciences. So be gentle with me with this one, please.
I can totally relate. Truth be told, when I was a young teenager, there were some subjects at school that I found hard and some that I found boring, and physics was both for a while. I actually had one school teacher tell me that my progress lacked momentum, which with no sense of irony.
Exactly, yes.
But it changed, though. I remember on my 15th birthday, my parents bought me a copy of Douglas Adams' masterpiece, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yes.
And as a teenager that was struggling with the complexities of life, I became obsessed with this idea of a single answer to life, the universe, and everything. And even though I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as the number 42, I thought if only I could find this answer, then somehow this chaos around me in my personal life could somehow make sense. And so for me, physics became the way to find this answer. And that's what motivated me to study physics at A-level and ultimately at university and write this book. And what I hope the book shows is how lessons and ideas from physics can help make sense of very human problems that one might not normally associate with the world of physics.
You see, I'm fascinated by this because I too read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, etc., etc. And all it did with me was inspire a love of Vogue and poetry, and also to get to carry a towel with me wherever I went. How did you therefore take what you found hard and boring, and how did you change your mindset to actually, if you like, get physics and then go on to study it further?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, what I found was I studied physics at the University of Oxford, and then I graduated, and I did a number of different things in my career. I was a management consultant. I worked in the civil service. I now work in the tech sector. And so you'd think I'd have left the world of physics behind. But as I dealt with various challenges and setbacks in life, I've lost my job. I've made bad decisions. I've felt the pangs of petty jealousy. Through all these sort of very human challenges that I face, I found myself continuing to find inspiration and ideas in physics. And this is the story I try to tell in my book. And it's actually not just my story, because in addition to my own personal experience, what I discovered is that there are a number of real physicists out there who are today using ideas from physics to tackle real social and economic problems, whether that's climate change or economic inequality or social unrest. So I try to tell their story too in this book.
I mean, applying the laws of physics to everyday life, I mean, I suppose we all, whether we like it or not, and I'm obviously a sort of humanities stroke bad arts man, but I suppose that the laws of physics, I mean, there are laws to physics. We can come on to quantum and chaos theory, which is most of my life, a bit later. But I suppose, there are, that life normally works within the bounds of the laws of physics.
That's right, yeah. I mean, let me give you an example just to bring this to life, because I think maybe, people might be thinking, how does physics relate to everyday life? So one of the things I personally struggle with in my life is making bad decisions, and perhaps other people can relate to this. So
welcome to my world, but yes, there we go.
Yeah, exactly. I've made decisions that other people can't understand, that I can't understand. Why did I make that decision? And I discovered that there's this relatively new area of research called quantum cognition, where scientists are applying quantum physics to explain our seemingly irrational decisions.
Right.
And what they found is that there are so many situations where people make these irrational decisions and where classical models of cognition can't predict the results you empirically see. But when you do apply quantum physics to those same situations, you're able to actually predict how humans behave remarkably accurately, which is astonishing. And so, and one of the key reasons for this is that people who study quantum cognition believe that we make decisions differently when we are in a state of uncertainty. And those who've studied quantum physics will know that uncertainty is a key feature of the quantum world, where subatomic particles are always in a state of uncertainty. You can never know exactly where they are and how fast they're going.
Right.
And the same applies for our brains and how we make decisions. And when we're in a state of uncertainty, we make decisions that sometimes seem irrational, but perhaps actually make perfect sense through the lens of quantum physics. So that's one example of a story I tell in my book.
I mean, can we also? I mean, we talk about sort of instability, and do we therefore make decisions when our physics are unstable? I'm just thinking, do we bring in kinetic energy then? Here's a word. That's one thing I remember from my physics O level. Do we bring in kinetic energy then to our decisions? For example, are our relationships, do they start with a tremendous burst of kinetic energy, which then sort of peters out after, years, months, whatever?
Relationships is another area that I explore in the book. So I'm thankfully happily married now for many years, but before meeting my wife, I had a handful of different romantic relationships. Some were good, where it felt that there was trust and enough give and take to survive the occasional setback. Unfortunately, though, I had a handful of relationships that were less good, that felt, one misplaced word away from a blazing row, and more often than not, me getting dumped. And I try to think about, what's the difference between sort of those good relationships and the bad relationships? Because as someone who struggles with this, it felt like the same action in one situation could lead to one outcome, but in a different situation lead to a totally different outcome. And the way I think about it is, a good relationship is like two balls at the bottom of a valley. If you imagine giving either one of those balls a little nudge, what would happen? You'd imagine the ball would roll slightly up the side of the valley, but then roll back down and eventually end back exactly where it started. That's an example of a stable system. It returns to equilibrium.
Yeah.
Now imagine those same two balls, but this time on top of a hill. So it's the same balls experiencing the same forces, but now imagine what would happen if you gave either one of the balls a little nudge. Chances are it would roll all the way down the hill and end up somewhere very different to where it started. And that's an example of an unstable system. And so when I think about the good relationships and the bad relationships, I think about the difference between stable systems and unstable systems, and how sometimes the same action, the same nudge, as it were, can lead to very, very different end outcomes.
Can you argue as well that, we don't live in a utopia, and we don't live in a perfect society. So there, and people will say, well, that's not fair. But can you argue, well, that unfortunately is the way that physics works. The things don't have to always be in a state of perfect equilibrium.
No, exactly, and that's one of the key ideas that I explore in my book. So another challenge I face personally in my life, which again maybe your listeners can relate to, is feelings of jealousy. So early in my career, I, as a young man, I would often look at others who seemed to have more than me, more money and more success, and I would feel jealous, and I would feel this is so unequal. But what I realized, the more I think about it, it wasn't inequality that upset me. It was actually unfairness. And there's a really interesting experiment actually from the world of psychology. You may have heard of it. So they did this at Yale University a few years ago, where they gave a number of children 10 coins to distribute between two people based on how well those two people did on a test. And so in the first scenario, they're told the two people did equally well. And so, as you can imagine, the children thought about it and gave 5 coins to each of them. In the next scenario, they're told one person did slightly better than the other. So they think about it and they give 6 coins to the person who did better and 4 coins to the other. What's interesting, though, is in the final scenario, they were told they had 11 coins to distribute, but that both people had performed equally well on the test. And the children weren't allowed to break up a coin into half. And so they thought about it. And you know what they did? They actually threw away the 11th coin so that they could then give 5 coins each to each of the participants. And I think what that simple experiment shows is that from a very young age, what people care about, perhaps more than inequality, is actually unfairness. And you see this in the physical world around us. I mean, the very origin of our universe from the Big Bang, it started as this uniform singularity, but very quickly, as the universe started to expand, inequality began to develop, where some areas of the universe had slightly more energy than others. And it's those slight changes and slight differences that led to the ultimate formation of stars and galaxies and planets and Earth and ultimately all of us and life as we know it. And so, without inequality, the universe wouldn't exist. Life wouldn't exist. The universe would be a featureless blob. So in some ways, inequality is inbuilt into the universe. The universe wouldn't exist without it. And what we should be caring about is unfairness more than inequality.
And the other thing is the fact that, again, Luddites like myself might just sit here and go, well, physics is old and dusty and you don't look at it. I use it less in algebra than I do in my present life. But then again, because of the unpredictability of life, that we need, so things like, for example, favorite word of most of my life is live by chaos theory. But, not so much if it will go wrong, it can go wrong. But if it does go wrong, here are some ways that, physics can help you deal with it.
That's exactly my hope writing this book. So, I mentioned The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at the start, and I should say, I can't promise that reading this book, you'll see that physics holds all the answers to life, the universe, and everything. My hope is that, my general view of the world is that with the complexity of life and the scale of the challenges we face, we need ideas from as many different disciplines and as many different fields as possible. And for me, I think physics has the ability to contribute to discussions and help tackle some of life's challenges. And my hope is that the way I've written this book, it's a love letter to physics and hopefully shares my passion for the subject, but hopefully it's a way of introducing ideas to physics to people who may have, not loved the subject at school, and introduce physics in a way that's accessible and personal and hopefully entertaining.
You see, the thing I like about this, Zahaan, is because I'm not a physics person, I'm a humanities person, and my thing is history. People always say to me, "How can you be so passionate about history? Because it's just a bunch of dead kings and awful robber barons." But I then explain that it's not, and it's constantly being updating, and we are constantly seeing the ripples of history being repeated. And you have just explained to me why physics is something that is not a dusty textbook, should be filed away under, in the science section of my library, but it's something we should look at and learn and embrace in our everyday lives.
Exactly. That's my hope. I hope people will discover these hidden, beautiful, surprising ways in which physics can shed new light on very human problems. And I hope people will enjoy reading the book. It's very, it's personal, it's authentic, hopefully funny in times. I share some very honest experiences in my life that I've already mentioned a few of. I talk about, losing my job, but I hope it will provide a very human introduction to a subject that many people may not have thought about, since they were at school.
The book is called The Art of Physics, 8 Elegant Ideas to Make Sense of Almost Everything. It's by Zahaan Bharmal, who we are speaking to today. Is there a website? Do you do the social media thing? Where can people find you online?
So the website for the book is theartoffphysics.com.
Yep.
And I'm afraid I'm not very good at the social media, but I am on LinkedIn, so people can find me there.
And you can also, listeners, order the book via our own virtual bookstore. The book is called The Art of Physics. Thank you for being with me this morning and making me dust off my mental physics textbooks. Zahaan, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning.
Pleasure too. Thank you so much, Giles. Take care.